the midfield for Manchester United that day, obviously Beckham, Button, Scholes, and Veron's in there. I mean, it's a decent midfield, but Veron, he came on a huge money, huge reputation. The type of guy who would run games, who would be such a powerhouse in the midfield for Manchester United. It didn't quite work out, Vish. And I know you're a fan of Veron, he's playing. Were you disappointed that it never quite clicked with him at Manchester United? Or perhaps in hindsight, you're not surprised?
I wouldn't say disappointed, but genuinely quite sad. Because it felt like, I don't know, it felt like the last Infinity Stone. It felt like, right, this is when it gets serious for Manchester United. This is, everything comes together and they become a consistent continental force. I don't want to sit here and, given the amount of gibberish I spout on the ramble, I don't want to sit here and then poke holes in Sir Alex Ferguson's tactical brain, as it were, but I've really got the impression that he didn't necessarily know where to put Veron, and I wonder how much of that was because he knew where to put everyone else, and therefore there was only a certain place Veron could go, because he played out on the left. He would play sitting, he would play further forward. Sometimes there was the odd occasion he'd play almost as a number 10-ish type role, or like an advanced number 8, and all through it, I thought, well, I think he's good enough to do that. But then I'd probably say he was good enough to be a rocket scientist because I was that enamoured with him. And this game was a great example of he essentially starts out wide, and then by the end of the game, he's shifted maybe like half a space or like half a pitch inward, and he's just unplayable. But for that first half, you don't really see him. You're kind of thinking that United have been overawed, and it looks like they're playing with 10 men.
I mean, Jonathan, do you think one of the regrets for Manchester United is that, Veron was brilliant at Lazio, of course, won the league title there. We know Ferguson nearly left Manchester United around this time. And, of course, the man who was mooted to replace him was Sven-Göran Eriksson, who knew how to get the best out of Veron.
We get there.
And so do you think...
I thought this was too highbrow for Sven.
Do you think one of the great regrets for Manchester United is they never actually went for Sven and pushed out Ferguson?
No. I mean, I think the logic of signing Veron was sound in that he wanted greater control through midfield, and I think he was probably envisaging going to a 5-man midfield, which he did at times. But I mean, that was so unpopular that you go to Old Trafford and you'd hear them chanting 4-4-2, 4-4-2. It's such an extraordinary. I really like to think that had been a kind of true throughout football. The kind of when in around about 1960, when the back fours were replacing WM, you had people kind of demanding. You're chanting WM, WM, WM. But I think particularly there's those 4 games, because he played them in the group and then the quarter-final. Would have been this year or the following season, when they played Deportivo. And I think those games, you saw the advantages that playing a 4-2-3-1 gave you. And I mean, I remember sort of watching Deportivo and sort of thinking, and I think we'd seen it a little bit year 2000 as well. The 4-2-3-1 got dribblers back in the game. It got proper dribbling wingers. It gave you the defensive screen to have those 2 slightly less reliable players, rather than playing your hard-working up and down wide midfielders, which even Beckham, magnificent crossover footballer he was, he worked really hard. He always protected Gary Neville. Whereas you could play those slightly more creative, exciting maverick players. And I think Ferguson was probably looking to go to something a bit more like that, to both give him the extra solidity in the middle without, and actually not merely not lose creativity, but give a greater variety of creativity. And I think the problem was that Veron was just coming into an ecosystem where everybody knew their role. He was a perfect midfield 4 with, I mean, okay, there's Nicky Butt there as well, who could come in and give you more solidity if you wanted, but the Keane and Scholes in the middle, Beckham and Giggs wide. That is the classic British and Irish midfield 4. And then you try and drop this somebody who comes from an entirely different culture, who's never played in an English 4-4-2. You try and bring him into that system, and there's a real problem of of adaptation on both sides. And I think that's why it didn't work. And of course, there's a famous press conference the following May when Ferguson leaves going, he's a fucking great player, yous are all fucking idiots. Which is sort of, I mean, in retrospect, probably correct.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that, yeah.
I don't think it's about Veron not being a good player or United not. It's just, sometimes good players and good midfields, you can't just take a good midfielder and put him in another good midfield and expect that to create a better midfield. That's not how football works. It's a complicated thing, and getting the balance right, even for somebody is experienced and clearly brilliant as Ferguson. It's not a there's an element of gamble every time you do that.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question here, because I only get so long with Jonathan Wilson a year. If Veron was around now, do you think he would be, I suppose, on a higher tier as a footballer? Because because of the systems now would be easier to accommodate him, and I suppose there'd be more appreciation of his work.
In Premier League terms, yeah. I mean, I think he, in Italy and Argentina, he's hugely revered. But yeah, I mean, you can imagine him now in a modern 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1, which are not hugely different, I guess. You can imagine him being the slightly more creative one alongside Declan Rice or Calvin Phillips or something like that. And
so for West Ham and Leeds, he'd play for West Ham and Leeds.
Well, do you know what though? But funny you saying about all this. He might well have been better playing for Tottenham Hotspur because under Hoddle, Hoddle would have loved that type of player. Strange thing, but of course he wouldn't have been surrounded.
Well, him alongside Stefan Freund. That's
it's the partnership that we were cruelly denied. One could argue, but